Derivatives trading involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results.
Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. My name is John Pieranunzi, and this is the opening swing. Let's begin today, as we always do, with our news. Actually, a fair amount of news out of Europe, but it didn't create a lot of movement. We had the German inflation rate in line. English unemployment rate slightly better. Then we had the Zoo Economic Survey, which is usually a pretty big one. Came out a little better, but has not moved the market significantly. Coming to the U.S. hours, we have our PPI, which is our major news driver today at 8:30. That is likely to give us movement, in my opinion, followed by Fed's Cook speaking at 10 after 9, and then the big one, Powell speaking at 10 a.m. So those are the important things we have coming out of the U.S. hours. We also have a few announcements, a few Treasury announcements, and a 52-week bill auction later, which will be less important. Then, of course, the CPI looming tomorrow. So that's our news today. Let's take a quick look at some higher time frame charts. We'll begin with the weekly today. Not going to spend a lot of time because we spent more time on this yesterday. The thing that I mostly want to look at or draw your attention to today is the double top that we have. It's 64s, which is our prior week's high. So that's a price that we're aware of. And on this time frame, if this somewhat weak high gets taken out, then we have the 85s as our next target above on this time frame. Let's look at the daily. All right, here on the daily chart, we see that double top I described at 64, and we also notice that here we have something of a double bottom as well. Not exactly the tick, but the double bottom is we have 32 and 3/4 is the low here, and 33/4 is the low here. So a lot of tension being built here, and what we see is this sort of kurtotic distribution. And our expectation is if we get a strong move out of here, it could continue, possibly. What happens if it continues lower? We have a very clear structure target here at the 1275s, which is the prior week's VPOC and this HVN. If we push below, we have this low, which is an important area, and I would expect the support to be coming in ahead of this low in that 5200 region. And falling below that, we get into our breakout area, which is the 67 to 75 region, which would be the next test down here. So that's what it looks like on a trip lower. Above, we have the 75s, which is our daytime frame next level, for me at least. The 75, 71 to 75s, followed by the 85s, which we discussed on the weekly time frame, and then the Century 5300 and 5308, which I'm looking at. So that's kind of the landscape on this chart, looking out to around 1 to 1.5 Vala. So let's move into some lower time frame charts here. Here we have our 4x5 PNF, just a larger term PNF I like to look at just to kind of see price structure. And here we can see last week we had our impulse, balance, continuation, balance. So for me, our the bias here on a larger time frame is obviously higher. It's been higher since May. The weekly is pretty strong, so I'm not seeing a reason to abandon this bias yet. What does it mean if I have a long bias? It means that I'm expecting the I'm expecting pullbacks to find support for retests of the high, and we've gotten that with every significant pullback so far. Although we're noting that this is a double top, so we weren't able to push through, but we retested. But like I said, as of this moment, I don't see evidence for why I should abandon a more bullish skew to my outlook. And here we can obviously just reiterate our structured targets, the prior week's VPOC below, the high 75s and the 85s, and so on and so forth. Let's take a look at our 8 box and talk about some more specific price action. Here's our 8 box here. Let's mark out our key test areas quickly. So here we have the prior day's low. We have this key LVN at 20. We have the prior week's VPOC. And then down here we have the 5200 and the support, which could come in anywhere around 5200 as long as it's ahead of this low. So anything around this area. And then we obviously have our balance low down here in the 88 to 91 region. That's some stuff we're looking at below. Above, we're obviously looking at the prior day's high, that double top region. Then we're looking at the 75s. If we get through that, we have 85s, 92s, century, and then the 08s. So those are the areas I'm aware of. What are the areas that I'm looking at as potential tests? Let's talk about some paths that price may follow. We'll start with the most bullish scenario. The most bullish scenario to me would be if this kind of creeps up pre-market, potentially on the number, but some type of a creep up that doesn't that just totally respects the existing overnight low. That could this could happen pre-market on the number that just creeps up to here, gets this test, and maybe continues for some type of a test into this 69 to 75 region. So if this happens, I'm seeing this is pretty likely right now. If we get this, then this becomes another decision zone right here. Meaning, once we breach this double top, then the next question for me is do we pull back and respect the prior day's range for continuation that takes this high? In which case we may see sort of a grind ensue of just price sort of like squeezing higher. In which case that would be vulnerable to a pullback in my opinion. But as long as we're making higher lows like this and taking out highs, then there's no reason to think we're going to break. However, if we get this test, something like this, test back in the prior range, push higher, fail to take this high, and fall back into range, and then cannot get back out of range, this could be an area where we start to see a reversal. If this happens, make this high, get the test, fall back into range, cannot retest, then the price that we're looking at on the low, for me at least, is settlement. With this 50 area is also important. 50s are an area where we might see some kind of support. It's possible that we could kind of see it happen right there. However, if we are unable to get out of range, then we're definitely looking at settlement. So if we then fall back into here, well, we'll go over one more bullish scenario that is somewhat possible. We also it's possible we could see some type of a rounding here on the number ahead. Rounds, falls down, gives this test, takes out that double bottom right here, but cannot continue, gets back into range, gets back above P settle, and continues for some type of a rendition of this idea. If we fall back and we take this low, now we don't usually expect the high and the low to be taken on a day, but this range is relatively tight and we do have a news driver, and both the high and the low are relatively weak, so we can't discount it. But if we get some type of test lower out of range that gets support and gets back into range and then is able to get above P settle, if this high isn't taken out yet, then it would be vulnerable again, and we could see just this action pick up. That's a possibility for me. What could happen if we get sort of this price movement, but we don't get the bullish response? Well, that could look like something like a zipper here that makes an attempt to get back into prior settle or falls below, and then we're back into this area in this LVN, and we just sort of chop lower to get the prior settle target. I would expect on the initial test of the prior week's VPOC, I would expect support. But the question is, does the support get back into range? That's the question if we see that support there. If we do not see that support, and we get into the prior week's VPOC, and we are unable to get higher, then I would expect just sort of a slog lower. The 5200s, again, this is kind of the same thing I'm saying every day, but this is what the environment is. I would expect support on initial tests of all of these levels. you know, I would expect support on the initial test at 5,200, and I would expect support on an initial test lower here. The surprise for me today would be if we breach the 91s and we hold below. That would be the surprise for me today. Other than that, any of these areas, I'm expecting initial support on a test. How could I be wrong? Let's talk about how I could be wrong, because it happens a lot. So let's talk about it. Being wrong would meaning that we don't see support on any of these. I think it could like I said, it could happen with any break. I'm thinking we need to take out the tension up here before we really move lower. Could be wrong, but the thing is, if we start flushing through this area and just nothing, and we get to the 12s really quickly, that could signify to me that the downside has more legs. Like if we just flush through a lot of this, and then there's not support, and the 12s are really where we spend a lot of time, that could suggest to me that there's more downside. I'm just saying that's how it could happen. But regardless, I want to try to keep these a little shorter, so I think I'll wrap it there. Let me make sure that I kind of went over everything. Just basic expectations again. If we get an initial test lower, I'm expecting buyers on the first touch. And if we get an initial test higher, I would expect selling or potentially a rounded top. If we don't get that and we keep respecting the prior day's range, then we've talked about our targets above. And again, likewise, if we break this area and we continue, we've talked about our targets below, so we know. Now, what happens if we get just a total mess? We could also get a total mess that just finds some area of price, potentially this zone, and just gravitates to it. Or this could also happen slightly higher or lower, but if we find some range that we just get comfortable in and we test above, we test below, and we can't really go anywhere, that would be real messy, and you might just want to wait for CPI tomorrow. That would be a more dangerous trade. So that's what I'm looking at today, guys. We got CPI coming up, about 40 minutes until the number. So we have time to prepare. We have time to kind of use these plans I've given you and adapt them as more information comes out, which is how I do it. These plans are fluid. They're changing as the market changes. But that's what I got for you today. I hope it's helpful. I hope everyone has a pretty good day going in progress that's getting even better. I hope today, as always, I hope you find a way to make some other people smile in your life, because that's definitely the way to really improve just the world as a whole. That's how we do it. So that's enough for today. Keeping it at 12 minutes, doing pretty good. Let's get out there and clock some ticks, guys. Have a good one. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.